Tony, how are you, buddy? How's things?
Ahmed, what a morning after the night before. Check out the national newspaper here in Sydney. Have a look who's on the front page and have a look who's on the back page. The number one player in the world has made a triumphant return with a 2-0 victory over Denmark last night at Sydney Football Stadium, Australia.
75,000 people, packed the stands, great atmosphere, the whole country watching. What are your thoughts on the actual game?
Look, I think Australia is actually in the grips of Matildas mania, and I was reluctant to say this a few weeks ago. Yes, we had an amazing crowd for their first game of this World Cup here in Sydney. Maybe a little bit died off. I'm just trying to work out whether the Sam Kerr hype lived up to the output, which we'll touch on in a second. But if you isolate just the Matildas on Australia at the moment, they've been nothing short of amazing. They have gripped the country. And I think a lot of people have been reticent to really get involved in supporting the Matildas. And what I mean by that is, yes, we're all patriotic from the Prime Minister down to the sporting fans and to all the supporters. But I think now that the Matildas have proven to be as good as they are and through to the round of 16 following their 2-0 demolition of Denmark last night, I think now that the real swell of support is building.
Interesting. As a game, as a national team, right? The Matildas have given us many reasons to, support them and follow them. One of the issues that some may say, these are naysayers out there, they say to you, it is a World Cup and it's in Australia, so of course they're going to get all this support. But does the other side get the same support? The men's team, does it get the same support as the women's team?
Is that a rhetorical question or a question?
It's a question. People that on the street are saying this. People are saying, do the men's team get the same support as the women's team? We've seen a lot of investment go into the women's team, a new facility, a new home ground out in Victoria. A lot of investments gone into the Matildas as of recent. Okay, are we seeing the same for the men's team who don't even have a home ground?
But I thought they were on equal footing by way of home ground and facilities. My understanding was that there was a story written in one of the national broadsheets last week that said the Matildas don't have a home base.
They do have a home base. It's the same site as the Victorian, as the FFV, out near Latrobe University.
Oh, in Bundoora, where Melbourne City trains.
Yeah, we used to train. Yep. Melbourne City is in Casey now. That's their dedicated facility.
Yeah, I'm not convinced. I mean, it's on the outskirts of Melbourne. Yes, it's probably a high growth area where a lot of mums and dads are soccer oriented. But I would have thought you would move something closer to the city to be in the hub within arm's reach of the MCG.
Yes and no. Obviously, they've built something out there that they've dedicated to the Matildas. Do the Socceroos have a home ground?
No, they don't.
Why not?
I don't know. I mean, they can either play at the Lakeside Oval in South Melbourne, we're inside the Grand Prix track, or they train out at the Homebush Stadium where the Matildas played last night.
Well, this is my problem. My problem here is, okay, we all want to support one another, but there's this clear distinction and divide that's being created by these institutions. Yes, I'm going to get political here. That's why it's called raw sport. These institutions are creating a political divide between men and women and the teams. Because now, before the Men's World Cup, they had all this stuff about Qatar and all this political lobbying that they involved in the game. And then Qatar turned out to be the best World Cup that we've seen. Not by me, not me saying this. Pundits all around the world saying this, from Ibrahimovic to Rio Ferdinand to all these huge names around the world. Moral of the story is this. They've turned the game so political, a game that is struggling on the men's side here locally because of this political divide. Without the politics, it was struggling. Now it's increased. Why? Why is this happening? Why are we doing this to the world game here? Why are we putting some on a pedestal and why are we bringing some others down? Not saying it, but your actions speak louder than your words.
Well, who's putting who on a pedestal?
The female game has been put on the largest. Of course, it's a World Cup, and I'll say this again. I totally get it and I understand it, right? But what bothers me is that how come these facilities now are being provided as dedicated facilities for, let's say, the Matildas? The men don't have nowhere to actually call a base. And Graham Arnold, after the World Cup, said the same thing. We need a home ground. Why can't the men have their own base? Why?
Well, I think it is political. You said that at the top of your statement, and I'll tell you why. Is because FIFA is part of obviously the head of the world game, but also the people who determine what happens current day and in the future want the women's game through, be it soccer and or AFL and or tennis is already an equilibrium to the men's and or the NRL and other sports. They want it to be equal to the men, therefore to have equal footing so that men and women are on pay parity and that more women get involved in the workforce, the sporting game, and then they become taxpayers. So therefore, men and women are all the same across the world and you're less likely to have babies.
I mean, that's definitely a view. But what
Well, it's probably controversial and conspiratorial, but if you wait 3 to 4 years, you will see the global plan to have women and men on equal footing and to reduce men and women having babies and therefore for more women to become taxpayers.
So let's keep it sports. What we're looking at here, right, is we have sporting bodies around the country who are being directly prejudiced and biased to one side over the other, right? Where we know where all the revenue comes from for these associations. It comes from the men's game. Because why? Because the men's game generates more revenue than the women's game, right?
Same as the AFL and the NRL.
Sorry?
Same as the AFL and
Exactly.
the NRL.
So there's nothing wrong with having the women's game. We are not against that here. What we're saying is, right, don't start playing this game where, the women's have to have this, and the men's are going to be neglected. We're not in that business. We're in the business of whoever generates more gets paid more. Both need equal facilities, equal services, no problem. But in terms of pay and in terms of, in terms of revenue, we know who generates more and why they generate more. For God's sake, you got under 15s teams beating the best women's team in the world, the US national women's team. So what are you talking about? What are you trying to show me here? What are you trying to do here? So again, we're going on into these fantasy worlds and we're moving away from reality and what's happening. And it just rubbed me the wrong way. And that's why I haven't watched a single game of this World Cup.
So based on that outcome and that shock revelation, what is your antidote?
My antidote is this, right? We treat each other equally. And what we do is we give people based on what they put in and put out, not based on virtue signaling and so-called values that have been made up in the last 12 to 18 months.
So what you're saying is you want women and men to be equal, but you want whoever creates the biggest outcome by way of ratings and revenue should get the largest portion.
Exactly.
Okay, fair enough.
Exactly. So that's my 2 cents on the whole Women's World Cup and so on and so on.
2 cents. That's your $20,000. That was strong.
Always strong. Anyway, thank you, Tony. Once again, it's an absolute pleasure. Take care, everyone. We'll catch you all next week.